Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and today we are finally going to talking about the CN version 1.0 tier list. It is going to be from the same video that we have discussed in the last video, which was a team building guide. It has over 1.3 million views on Bilibili. So without further ado, let's get into today's content. Subscribe! So before we get into today's content, I do want to stress one thing. The tier list, it is not representative, or rather it is not a conclusive thing where everyone in tier 2 or tier 3 is just unusable. And this is also considering the fact that you do understand how team building works in Wuthering Waves, right? It doesn't matter if you just slap on like 3 main DPS and slap on one team from tier 0, then it's still not going to perform well because you do need to understand how team building works. So I highly recommend you guys to first check out the team building video as well as all the previous guys, like beginning guys, all the guys. I made a lot of content Wuthering Waves so far, and then after all those, come back and watch this tier list video again to get a more comprehensive understanding. So with that out of the way, this is going to be the CN version 1.0 tier list as of the current public release, 23rd of May 2024 version 1.0. So in the main DPS category, we have Encore at tier 0, as well as Jiyan, Sub DPS tier 0 as Sanhua, and Verena is gonna be our tier 0 support. Jiyan over here, it is gonna be with Signature Light Cone. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Without Signature Light Cone, the highest damaging main DPS in our release is going to be Encore at 29,500 per second. Right? Without Signature Light Cone, Jiyan's damage falls off a goddamn cliff, dropping to 24,900 without Signature Light Cone, which is still slightly above Calcharo at 22,300, and this is going to be 20,800 for Lingyang. And then tier 2 main DPS, we're going to have Chixia at 1.76 as well as Danjin at 1.59 as a main DPS. I'm going to talk about the criteria a little bit, but I'm just going to briefly go through what are the tiers so far. And then Sanhua is going to be tier 0 over here. Then tier 1 is going to be Modify. He does need Jiyan, and then this is going to be Danjin. He does need a main DPS Havoc, right? So Havoc main DPS, Danjin works exceptionally well as the secondary Havoc DPS with our main DPS Havoc, right? And then this is going to be slightly better than Jianxing, who does need to pair up with Calcharo, and then Aalto is going to need to pair up with Jiyan. Unfortunately, because Modify fundamentally performs better with Jiyan than Aalto, then Modify is going to be a better support than Aalto for this tier 1. And then tier 2 is going to be Taoqi, which is going to be the defensive sub DPS. And finally, we do have our support / sustain. Verena is going to be our best in slot. Bai is going to be our next best in slot. And then this Jianxing is in a very weird spot where you are basically a shooter plus a little bit of additional buffs and crowd control, so it doesn't really pair as well as the normal traditional support / sustain because her supportive ability is not as high. And then finally, we have the final role, which is going to be Yang, Shiounami, as well as our Spectral MC, right? They didn't include Havoc MC here. I think it's due to spoilers, so they didn't include Havoc MC. But if I were to guess, Havoc MC as a main DPS is probably going to play somewhere in tier 1 because Havoc MC surprisingly has been able to deal a considerable amount of damage. I'm going to be talking about Havoc MC in the future, but we'll just talk about it next time. So before we continue, I know you guys are probably like, why the fuck is Encore at tier 0? You insane in nuclear, right? So I'm just going to go through the criteria they met for this tier list. So tier 0, extremely strong core main DPS, fares well with every single team, as well as Chongnianbao is basically like for your resonance energy, you can charge up very fast. Tier 1, slightly lower DPS output, and then for your sub DPS, you can still pair them, but it is more limited, right? So for Sanhua, she basically pairs up very well with almost every single main TPS we have as of version 1.0 because basic attack and damage deepen is just a very universal outro skill that everyone can use of. That's why she's going to be tier 0. So the tier 1s doesn't mean that they're bad, it's just that they're a little bit more restrictive. But if you do have, like for example, Jiyan, and you have Modify or Sanhua, you run him with Modify to get an even better performance than pairing up with Sanhua, right? So it is just a little bit more niche, doesn't mean that they're worse in that sense, right? So, and then the last for our support is just their energy regeneration is not that high. So Verena has a very quick ultimate, right? Resonance energy, very fast, you can spam it out. So Paige maybe it's a little bit slower. So that's going to be the determining factor for our support / sustain category. So notes, every single number, especially for the main DPS here, is going to be through their server testing, and it does align with the public server's current data and current math and damage numbers, right? So this is updated to the public live version of Wuthering Waves. And then from a team building perspective, you need to consider a team's performance and not specifically a unit performance, which is a little bit similar to like Honkai style tier list. You don't really consider a unit to be tier 1 or tier 2. You need to consider how well their team performs. So for example, DOT team right now in Honkai style is extremely universal, pretty easy to build, and you can clear both MOC and pure vision, which is why DOT team comp, they tend to perform quite well, right? Hyper carry, it performs very well, but you probably need a little bit more investment. Your Invincible Rune, your Scylla, your Daughter ratio, you do need a little bit more investment, and it's a little bit more restrictive. And then Aircraft is just being Aircraft because she's completely broken, right? So you do need to consider this from a team perspective instead of an individual unit perspective, right? Do not, right? Tier 1, do not only look at tier 0. Okay, they are tier 0, therefore they're the best. I only want to get them, right? Do not look at only tier 0. Consider the team building capabilities, right? Every single unit here is gonna be at 0 Eidolons, and that's gonna be there. So if you have additional Eidolons for a unit, especially for 4 stars, their ranking can change very, very drastically. For example, Danjin's Eidolons, they're absolutely ridiculous. Her E4 provides crit rate, her E1 and E2 provides even more damage, and her E6 is a team-wide attack buff. So if you have a very high Eidolon Danjin, I wouldn't be surprised seeing her even placing quite well in the main DPS category, because based on testings, an E6 Danjin single target main DPS, assuming perfect rotations, no downtime, it is one of, if not the highest burst in the entire game. E6, right? So that's gonna be that. In the future tier lists, they would consider 4 stars with additional Eidolons. So for now, they're all going to consider Eidolon 0. So just take that into consideration. Havoc MC, right? Havoc MC is not included yet. And then this is gonna be the average damage, right? So this is quite important. Theoretical and actual performance in battle is impossible to be exactly the same, right? Because in a theoretical situation, your main DPS damage output will assume a perfect rotation at exactly the right time against the right enemy. In a real world battle, if you think Encore is tier 0 and she does like this amount of damage, you are probably not even gonna get close to this amount of damage, and this is assuming like max out gears and everything, right? So right now, for example, my Calcharo, every single basic here and there is probably around 300 to 400 damage, so it is nowhere near 29,000 damage per second. So this is like endgame stats, right? So theory is always gonna be different from reality. If you can pilot a character better than another unit, then always use it as your #1 priority when selecting a main DPS. If you cannot play Encore, if you don't know how range attack works, if you can't dodge, if you're just gonna get hit half the time, then there's no point playing Encore, right? Same thing for Calcharo, for Lingyang. If you really like Lingyang, right, and you can use Lingyang, then he's definitely gonna be a lot more valuable than Encore for your team. Important thing to note is, if we take AOE, grouping AOE monsters into consideration, when it comes to AOE content, there are some characters in this tier list that have an advantage. Namely, Jiyan, his ultimate has this innate grouping ability, right? He can group up all the units together and lump them with one and just damage them all. And none other units here have this ability of the self group up. So an issue that I have noticed with Calcharo is that when you're using his burst, his skills, it is very narrow, right? His range is very, very narrow. His ultimate is all basic attacks. So if the enemies are not grouped, you will have a more difficult time clearing AoE content with Calcharo compared to Jiyan, right? So there are some things that can't really be described over here. So if you want to take into grouping into consideration, then Jiyan's rating will go up drastically because he's the only DPS we have right now that has an innate self-grouping for AoE content, right? So that's going to be that. For single target DPS output, then Jiyan's going to fall off because Jiyan's key ability, his key strength is not single target burst, right? His main usage is using his ultimate to group up waves of enemy and dissipate them at the same time. So if you're going to be using single target content, then expect his rating to fall off a little bit. So that is pretty much the gist of how this tier list is going to look like. Yeah, for our version 1.0 tier list, I'm not going to say whether it's accurate, I'm not going to say whether it's inaccurate because I'm just here to translate and just tell you guys exactly what they think. This is a tier list that has been pretty much one of the most popular tier lists that we have in BDB right now. So going to the more in-depth calculations, I'm going to keep this as brief as possible. This is every single main DPS calculations. So I'm just going to keep it very, very brief because I'm pretty sure you guys won't even want to know all that anyways. So this is going to be the criteria of 10 double crit, 2 attack percentage, and 2 damage percentage. So this is going to be the substats. This is going to be 3 cores main DPS. 3 cores main stat is always going to be the elemental damage. 4 cores is always going to be double crit. 1 core is always going to be attack, right? So these are the criteria. So Jiyan, Encore, Jiyan with signature light cone, Encore with I believe this is the 5-star weapon, then Jiyan with no signature light cone, then this is going to be Calcharo, and then all this is going to be the damage and the attack. So now let's just go into the thing, right? So Encore with Yingling's signature weapon, which obviously we cannot get right now. I think this is the only number we need to care about. In 23 seconds, she managed to deal 34,473. And then if we were to take a look at Encore with a standard weapon, then Encore's damage drops from 34,000 to roughly 29,000 within 23 seconds, right? So that's gonna be a roughly 5,000 damage drop off, something along these lines. So not too big of a deal, roughly a slightly more than 10%. Yep, it's not bad. Then there's gonna be Jiyan with his signature weapon and Jiyan with the standard weapon. Jiyan, 23 seconds, 31,451 with the signature, or with the normal weapon, it's gonna be 24,000. So you can see that this damage drop off for Jiyan with or without a signature weapon is gonna be quite big. So I guess the main issue is just because the normal weapon right now we have for our DPS is tied to energy regeneration. Whereas Jiyan's signature weapon is very, very heavily tied to offensive stats, your attack and all that kind of stuff, right? So in terms of raw damage output, Jiyan without signature weapon is gonna fall off by a much more considerable amount compared to Encore with the signature weapon slash Yingling signature weapon, right? So that's gonna be that. That's gonna be Jiyan. And now moving to Calcharo. Calcharo signature weapon. This is gonna be a teammate, right? So this is Calcharo with signature weapon with Yingling, right? Then this is gonna be 27,201, and then this is gonna be 25,635. What's the difference here? Okay, check. They made a little typo here. This is not with Yingling. This is with Sanhua. So this is the difference with Calcharo running with Yingling versus running with Sanhua. So if we were to run Sanhua instead of Yingling, the damage drops off by actually not a very impactful amount. It is only 1.6k-ish, changing from Yingling to Sanhua. So the idea that you really want to run Yingling with Calcharo, it is not that necessary compared to, because if you just run Sanhua here, the damage drop off is not that much, right? So if you really like Calcharo and you're thinking, oh, should I even pull for Yingling because if I really like Calcharo, rest assured his performance is not going to be that impacted when you do pair him up with Sanhua instead of Yingling, right? So that's going to be for Calcharo. Then jumping into Calcharo, I guess this is a separate rotation. So this is the third hit, right? So this is going to be the separate rotation. The damage drops off by a little bit. I guess this is not that important, but this is going to be a separate rotation with Sanhua without Yingling. And then jumping into Calcharo with Jianxing. So this is the reason why I think the previous video I mentioned why not the previous, is it this video? I've lost track of time, right? I basically said something about Jianxing's best in slot is with Calcharo, but Calcharo's best in slot is not with Jianxing. And this is the reason why. So the damage output over here is going to be 20,574, which is even lower than Calcharo with Sanhua, right? So you can see that even though Jianxing, she pairs very well with Calcharo, Calcharo pairs even better with Sanhua or Yingling, right? So Jianxing, even though it works, but the damage is going to be falling off by quite a bit as compared to a 4-star sub DPS such as Sanhua, right? So that's going to be that for Calcharo, a lot of numbers here. And going into Lingyang, right? Lingyang, there's only a singular math, and this is going to be Yingliang with the signature weapon with Sanhua. Overall damage is going to be roughly 20,812. Not too bad. So far, all the numbers here, they're all above 20k. The only two instances where we broke 30k in 23 seconds is going to be Encore, Yingling's signature weapon, and Jiyan with Jiyan's signature weapon, right? These are the only two instances that we broke 30k. Everything else is roughly between the 20 to 30-ish range. You can see that for Lingyang, his damage output from 25 seconds is also at 20,812, so it is not too far off compared to the rest of the class, such as Calcharo or even Jianxing, right? So that's going to be that. And then this is going to be a secondary map which shows Jiyan with signature weapon plus Aalto. The overall damage is still really good at 27,433, but it does fall off quite a bit when you pair him up with Mortifei over here. So when you pair with Mortifei, it falls off by roughly 4,000, 5,000-ish. So it shows in this theoretical situation that Mortifei is a better pairing for Jiyan than Aalto, right? So Mortifei does more damage than pairing up with Aalto. So that's gonna be that. And then just gonna be wrapping up last two map over here. Yeah, then overall, okay, this is gonna be Chixia plus Taoqi, no hit, and then this is gonna be Danjin with Mortifei, right? So overall, that damage is 70,000, 50,000. So that is roughly the math for the calculations done by the CN content creators with regards to this specific tier list, right? So overall, like I said, theoretical numbers, they are never going to be accurate compared to real life numbers. It is always going to be dependent on your pilot, because unless you can nail down this exact rotation, unless you can do everything in perfect timing, right? Sanhua, EQ, Verena, AA, EQQ, jump, AA, right? Unless you can nail this down, your in-battle performance is going to be very, very different when it comes to theoretical versus reality, right? So overall, this is going to be the CN tier list for version 1.0. TLDR for the main DPS, Encore has the highest damage outputs out of everyone, assuming the perfect scenario with the perfect team comp. Secondary run-up with Signature Icon is going to be with Jiyan, and then Calcharo is going to be here, Lingyang is going to be here, then TLDR is going to be here. And for sub DPS, the most universal sub DPS is going to be from Sanhua because she basically pairs with everyone, right? Almost everybody can run her, and then a little bit more niche is going to be Modify, Danjin, and Qiuxing, Jianxing into Qiushui, right? Then all these going to be a little bit more niche, but doesn't mean that they are worse. It's just that this is very, very universal. Same thing for Verena. Verena is the more universal. Baya is basically a less substitute, right? Because she's a 4-star, less multipliers, and then the rest of it over here is just going to be a little bit more niche overall, right? So with that, we've come to the end of our CN version 1.0 tier list as of this current moment, right? If you guys have any further discussions, head over to the comment section or join the Discord, discord.g/Pokke's video. Very active community on a daily basis. Want to check out my stream at Twitch.tv for YouTube, I'll stream every single day. Should you open it on Discord, right? So I think this tier list should show that majority of units, they are still relatively balanced. You can definitely use them to clear every single content we have in the game right now. So don't worry about it too much. Even if you get Lingyang, don't worry about it too much. If you didn't get Calcharo, or if you're gonna be an Encore main, I this is the part I'm most surprised. I did not expect Encore to be the pretty much tier 0 DPS, which is insane, right? So maybe this will influence your decision when it comes to pulling. Maybe it will not. Who knows? This is gonna be left out to you, right? Tier lists are always subjective. There's never ever going to be an objective tier list that is completely accurate. It is always depend on the player, how often you use these units, how comfortable you are using these units. So that's gonna be that. All the best for your GM pulls, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.